Welcome to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to being well-informed.
Hey there.
Today, we're diving deep into some really fascinating source material you shared with us. We're grappling with some big ideas around belonging, courage.
And yeah, just what it means to live in a world that feels pretty divided right now.
Exactly. And our map for this dive, it comes straight from the research behind Brené Brown's work, specifically Braving the Wilderness.
Right. Years of research, really digging into people's lived experiences through interviews, qualitative stuff.
Yeah. So our mission today is to really get to the heart of what true belonging means. You know, how it's different from just like fitting in.
And why it feels so challenging to find it today.
And maybe uncover the surprising path the research suggests for actually getting there. Okay, I'm ready. Let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
So the research really kicks off by focusing on this like fundamental human thing.
Yeah.
Our deep need to belong.
Totally. We're wired for it, right?
As social creatures, absolutely.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is where the author herself starts this really strong, almost visceral reaction she had to a quote from Maya Angelou.
Yeah, I remember reading that. Someone she really admired.
Deeply.
Mhm.
And the quote is, "You are only free when you realize you belong no place. You belong every place, no place at all."
And her first thought was basically, nope, that's wrong.
Right. Like, belonging is everything. What's life without it?
Exactly. And that sort of anger even, it came directly from her own experiences, this really painful, lifelong search to fit in, the ache of not belonging.
Which was a huge theme in her childhood.
Absolutely. So belonging everywhere and nowhere sounded like, well, like her worst nightmare, not freedom.
And she shares these stories that really hammer that home, like being just 4 years old in New Orleans.
Oh, the name story. Cassandra Brené Brown. Yeah. Seeing her full name and slowly realizing her first name made some white families assume she was black, so no party invites. And then black families were surprised when this white kid showed up. Just kindergarten was already complicated.
And then the constant moving, always the new girl in middle school.
Right, while her parents' marriage was struggling.
Which kind of amplified things like the high school drill team tryouts, the Bear Cadets.
Oh, that seemed like such a huge deal for her, like this perfect, orderly world she could escape into.
Totally. She put everything into it. Liquid diet for the weigh-in, practicing constantly.
Nailed the routine, felt completely ready.
But then on the day, she showed up. Kind of unprepared in another way. No makeup, not looking the part while everyone else was, polished.
Her number was 62. And
Yeah.
it just wasn't on the list posted on the gym door.
Oof.
And the part that really cut deep, she says, wasn't just missing the team itself.
It was a ride home.
Yeah. The silence from her parents, not a single word. And that felt like she didn't even belong to her family, the most basic group.
Wow. Yeah, the research really highlights that. Pain from not belonging in your family is uniquely dangerous. It can really mess with your sense of self-worth.
So the research identifies, 3 paths people take with that kind of pain?
Yeah, basically. You can numb it or inflict it on others. You can deny it or maybe pass it on. Or you can choose to own it and try to turn it into empathy,
And she admits she tried the first 2 before figuring out the third.
which is understandable. And it's powerful, isn't it? How that whole struggle actually pushed her towards research, studying people, trying to figure it all out.
Becoming an expert fitter in, a chameleon.
Right. Always adapting. But the cost was,
Loneliness. Feeling like a very lonely stranger to herself.
and that's the turning point, right? Where the Maya Angelou quote suddenly clicked. It wasn't about finding some external group or place.
It was about belonging to yourself.
Exactly. And that clicked in a conversation with her husband, Steve, who just saw her, really saw her.
And that seeing that moment, it sparked this whole research dive into what true belonging actually is.
Which led to this really rich, evolved definition. True belonging. It's described as a spiritual practice
Okay.
of believing in and belonging to yourself so deeply that you can actually share your most authentic self with the world and find something sacred, both in being part of something and in standing alone in the wilderness.
So the key is you have to be who you are.
Not change who you are to fit in. And this kind of belonging, you carry it
Yeah.
in your heart.
Belonging is carried in the heart.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a fundamental shift.
It really is.
And there's that almost mythic story later where she actually meets Maya Angelou on Super Soul Sunday.
Yeah. And Angelou looks right at her, sings that line, "Like a tree planted by the river, I shall not be moved," and then tells her, Do not be moved, Brene.
Talk about a full circle moment, like getting this direct instruction, plant your damn feet.
And she gives real examples of what that looked like. Choosing jeans and clogs for a big leadership event when everyone expected business attire.
Or refusing to edit out her faith, or even her cussing from talks when people asked her to.
Yeah. Small acts, maybe, but acts of standing alone. Choosing to belong to herself, even if it made her stick out.
It really pushes against that instinct most of us have, right? To just conform, to look for validation outside ourselves. How does this idea of belonging to yourself, carrying it in your heart, how does that challenge the way you think about fitting in?
Well, it's a huge internal shift. And it's critical because the research points out that the external world we're trying to navigate, it often feels increasingly, fragmented, disconnected.
Yeah, the book uses that term high lonesome, like the bluegrass sound.
Exactly. That sound that somehow captures both deep pain and this sort of wild freedom.
It feels like a good description for right now.
It really does. And it points to what the research calls a collective spiritual crisis. Yeah. A diminishing sense of shared humanity.
We're sorting ourselves.
Yeah, sorting ourselves into these factions, political, ideological, you name it. And that sorting seems to just breed more blame, more anger.
It makes people feel more lonely, more untethered.
That's what the research suggests. It ties back to her earlier work defining spirituality as recognizing we're all connected, right? Grounded in love and compassion. And the argument is that link feels broken.
There's that concept, the big sort, that the research brings in.
Yeah, from Bill Bishop's work. The idea that we've literally sorted ourselves geographically, politically, spiritually into these bubbles.
Yeah.
Like-minded groups.
And inside those bubbles, dissent isn't really welcome.
Often, no. Thinking can become more extreme, and we tend to only consume information that confirms what we already believe.
And the numbers on that are pretty stark. The research mentions back in 1976, less than a quarter of U.S. counties had these landslide presidential results.
Meaning most people live near others with different political views. You had to interact.
But by 2016, that jumped to 80%. 80.
80%. We are physically and ideologically much more separated.
But here's the kicker, the paradox. This sorting hasn't actually delivered more belonging.
No. It seems to have fueled loneliness. The research points to a massive increase, like from around 20% of Americans reporting loneliness in the 80s.
To over 40% today.
Yeah. So sorting into our groups hasn't actually made us feel more connected within them, strangely enough.
And the work of John Cacioppo is important here, right? Defining loneliness not just as being alone,
but as perceived social isolation. It's subjective. And it acts like a warning signal from your body, like hunger or thirst, telling you you need connection.
And connection is vital for well-being. The research is clear on that.
Absolutely. And ignoring that loneliness signal, it's dangerous. Your brain shifts into self-preservation mode.
Which means less empathy, more defensiveness.
Exactly. And paradoxically, it fuels more isolation. And the health impact. The book highlights this really sobering stat. Loneliness increases your odds of dying early by 45%.
Wow. Compare that to what? Obesity at 20%? Excessive drinking at 30%.
Yeah, loneliness is a serious public health issue.
So if we're digging for the root cause behind all this sorting, this disconnection, the research points pretty squarely at one thing.
Fear.
Fear. Fear of what? What? Vulnerability? Getting hurt?
Fear of conflict. Fear of not belonging. All of it. And fear, the research suggests, it acts like this hot lava spreading through communities, widening those fault lines that already exist. Race, gender, class.
Pushing us into our separate corners.
That's the picture it paints.
Does that resonate with you, listening? This idea of the world feeling high lonesome, maybe experiencing a kind of spiritual crisis? And where do you see fear driving division or disconnection? Maybe even in yourself?
Well, if that's the landscape, this sort of high lonesome, sorted world, then finding true belonging, it requires enormous courage.
Braving the wilderness, that's the term.
Right, or even becoming the wilderness, which means, you have to leave those safe ideological bunkers. Choose to live with an open heart, even when it's really uncomfortable.
Okay, so what does that actually look like? How do you do that?
The research frames it as an active practice. It means intentionally seeking out connection.
With people who are different from you.
Yes. Listening. Having the hard conversations. Choosing curiosity instead of just reacting defensively. Actively pursuing togetherness, even when it feels tough.
And there were two core practices that really stood out in the research for navigating this.
Yes. The first one is, people are hard to hate. Close up. Move in.
I love that phrase. It's so true, isn't it? It contrasts that like abstract online hate.
The wide-angle shot.
Yeah, with the zoomed-in reality of actual human relationships, it's way easier to demonize a label than a person you actually know.
And the research gives these really powerful, specific examples from people interviewed, like the lifelong conservative who found incredible support from their Democratic friend during a really tough family time.
Or the feminist activist learning about effective action from a deeply religious, pro-life Catholic teacher.
Or the parent whose Republican son-in-law is just this incredibly loving partner and dad.
These close relationships, they complicate things. They challenge those easy generalizations we make.
They really do. And it highlights that truth that sometimes it's easier to just be angry than to admit you're hurt or scared underneath.
Yeah, the research emphasizes pain is often the root of hate. And that pain needs, well, care, not just suppression.
Right. Anger can be a catalyst, sure, but it's not sustainable. You burn out.
The book shares that incredibly moving example of Antoine Larius.
Oh, after the Bataclan attack in Paris, losing his wife.
And his public letter, "You will not have my height." It's just such a profound choice. Choosing courage, transforming the pain, refusing to give in to the hate the attackers wanted to spread.
Choosing life and love, really. His pain was immense, but he chose not to let it curdle into bitterness.
Okay, so that's move in. What's the second practice for braving the wilderness?
Speak truth to bullshit. Be civil.
Okay, bullshit. The research gets specific about this, right? Using philosopher Harry Frankfurt's definition.
Yeah. Bullshit isn't quite the same as lying. Lying is defying the truth. You know it's false, but you say it anyway. Bullshit is more like dismissing the truth altogether.
You don't really care if it's true or false. You're just saying it for effect or to get something done.
Exactly. And Frankfurt argues we often do it when we feel pressure to have an opinion on something we don't actually understand.
Especially in a culture where saying, I don't know, can feel like weakness.
Right. Better to bluff than admit ignorance or ask questions.
And the research flags one really common type of bullshit we see all the time now.
The you're either with us or against us trap.
Ugh, that false choice. It just shuts down any nuance, doesn't it?
Totally. It's often an emotional tactic, especially when people feel stressed. It forces everyone to pick a side.
And it plays on that deep fear of being kicked out, of not belonging. It silences anyone who disagrees by framing them as the enemy.
Exactly. So, refusing that frame, refusing to pick a side in a false dichotomy, that's choosing the wilderness.
So how do you speak truth to that kind of thing effectively, while still being civil?
The research suggests two things. First, generosity. Try to interpret the other person's words or actions in the most generous way possible.
Don't just assume they're being malicious. Maybe it's fear or lack of knowledge.
Or their own pain talking.
Yeah.
And second, civility. Not just being polite, but real civility. The Institute for Civility definition focuses on respect, listening, finding common ground, seeking understanding.
Even when it's hard, the research mentions that law, Brandolini's law.
Yeah, the bullshit asymmetry principle.
Yeah.
Basically, it takes way more energy to clean up bullshit than to create it in the first place.
Ain't that the truth? Okay, so thinking about your own life, how hard is it for you to actually move in towards people you really disagree with? And where do you notice bullshit popping up in conversations? Maybe even your own. Could you try applying that generosity and civility instead?
Which leads right into the next really critical point the research makes. If we're going to move closer, have these tough conversations, speak truth, we absolutely need boundaries.
Right, you can't just open yourself up to everything. So the big question the research asks is, where's the line? Where do you draw the line in the wilderness?
And the answer from the research is really clear. The line is obviously drawn at physical safety, but just as importantly, it's drawn at dehumanizing language and behavior.
Dehumanization. That's a heavy word, but a really important concept here.
It is. The research explains it as this psychological process where we basically strip others of their humanity, make them seem less than human.
Why do we do that?
Well, it allows us to bypass our natural inhibitions against harming other people. It's a way to justify cruelty or mistreatment. It helps us deal with conflicting motives, like wanting to hurt someone but knowing deep down it's wrong to hurt another human.
And the research lays out how it happens. It starts with what? An enemy image.
Yeah, creating an enemy image, framing things as pure good versus pure evil, black and white, which leads to rigid thinking, zero sum if you win, I lose.
And the end point is moral exclusion.
Exactly. Where the targeted group is basically pushed outside the circle of who deserves basic moral consideration and protection.
And the source material doesn't pull punches with historical examples.
No, it's chilling. Nazis calling Jews subhuman or rats, Hutus calling Tutsis cockroaches, slave owners viewing enslaved people as animals, Bosnians called aliens. The research is emphatic. This language always comes before mass violence.
And the hard truth is, we're all susceptible to falling into this,
Right.
especially when we feel threatened.
That's what the research suggests, and it brings it right to today, arguing that a lot of our modern political talk, especially online, is dangerously close to this dehumanizing line.
The source gives specific, uncomfortable examples from across the political spectrum, right? Not taking sides, but just showing the pattern.
Yes, vile terms for female politicians, regardless of party. Phrases like deplorables or not even human, calling presidents pigs, referring to immigrants or other groups as animals or aliens.
The research is unequivocal. There is a line. It's etched from dignity. We cannot tolerate dehumanization. It's the main tool of violence throughout history. Full stop.
And crucially, it points out the cost to us when we engage in it. It diminishes our own humanity, our own integrity. It's not about holding people accountable. It's not social justice.
It's emotional offloading, dumping our own fear and anger.
That's how the research frames it. And it clashes with so many core values and faiths that tell us to see the humanity in everyone, even those we strongly oppose.
The research also gets into the complexity of taking nuanced stances here, using the whole Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, All Lives Matter debate as an example.
Right. And the author's perspective, grounded in the research, isn't about diminishing any group, but understanding that Black Lives Matter specifically arose as an effort to rehumanize Black citizens after centuries of systemic dehumanization, starting with slavery.
So while, of course, all lives matter, the movement has a specific rehumanizing purpose rooted in that history.
Exactly. It's messy. It's complex. But engaging with that nuance is part of true belonging. The Penn State example is mentioned, too, that tension between loyalty to an institution and holding it accountable for protecting individuals.
So the boundaries in the wilderness, physical safety, and a hard line against dehumanizing language and behavior.
Absolutely. Rehumanizing starts with our words, the images we use.
This feels so vital, yet so under attack right now. Where do you see that line of dignity being crossed? In public discourse, maybe even closer to home? And how does understanding dehumanization maybe change how you hear certain things or react to certain images?
And if you're drawing those lines, but still trying to move in, you need tools for the conflict that will inevitably arise. The research highlights conflict transformation as a really helpful approach, drawing from an interview with Michelle Buck.
Okay, conflict transformation, not resolution. What's the difference?
Resolution often implies, like going back to how things were, or finding a solution where someone wins and someone loses. Transformation aims deeper. It seeks understanding, tries to create something new from the conflict.
And allows people to stay connected even if they still disagree.
That's the goal. A key part is looking for the underlying intentions. Buck asks, what's this really about? Getting past the surface arguments to the needs, the fears, the deeper stuff driving the conflict.
That makes sense, instead of just arguing about who said what.
Exactly. And another tool she offers is distinguishing past, present, and future. It's so easy to get stuck arguing about the past. You did this. No, you said that.
Right, the endless loop.
She suggests trying to pivot. Acknowledge the past if you need to, but anchor in the present. Okay, where are we right now? And then focus on the future. What kind of future are we trying to build together?
That helps find common ground, even if you totally disagree about what happened before or even what's happening now.
It can. And maybe the most courageous part of this whole approach, Buck says, is listening with a genuine desire to learn.
Even when you really, really want to just argue back or shut down.
Especially then, asking questions like, tell me more. Listening to actually understand their perspective, not just waiting for your turn to talk or deciding if you agree.
That takes serious courage. And it brings us back, doesn't it, to that personal practice, becoming the wilderness yourself. The research uses Viola Davis's story as such a powerful example of this.
Oh, her story is incredible. Coming from this childhood just marked by intense trauma, poverty, feeling deeply ashamed like something was wrong with her. Belonging was just about survival then.
And carrying that pain into adulthood, finding it hard to speak up, to really be seen.
Until that moment in therapy, with the question, what if nothing changes? Would you be okay?
Wow, that's a confronting question.
And her wrestling with it, her answer, allowed her to choose not to be defined by the past anymore. She also talks about healing her relationship with her father.
And that realization after he died, that every story matters, including his. With all its pain and flaws, everyone deserves to tell their story and have it heard.
And she has this brilliant take on needing thick skin. She argues it keeps out the good stuff too, vulnerability, love, intimacy.
So she chooses
What?
transparency.
Transparency, translucence, refusing to own other people's shortcomings and criticisms, just letting it pass through.
And her simple rules for living this out, they really embody becoming the wilderness, don't they?
They really do, doing her best, allowing herself to be seen, putting it all out there, don't leave anything on the floor, and sharing her whole story, failures, shame, successes with her daughter.
So her daughter knows she's not alone in her own struggles. It's like saying, this is me, all of it, my mess, my journey. This is what belonging to myself looks like.
It's a profound example of cultivating that belonging inside in the heart.
How might those conflict transformation tools, looking for intentions, past, present, future focus, listening to learn, how might they help you in your own relationships or disagreements? And what does Viola Davis's journey maybe teach you about owning your own story, about the courage to become the wilderness yourself?
So we've really taken a deep dive into this research on true belonging today. We've waded through some tough stuff, the pain of fitting in, the high lonesome feeling of disconnection.
And explored this kind of counterintuitive path towards belonging, finding it inside yourself first, and then figuring out how to connect across all our differences.
We've learned true belonging isn't about finding the perfect group, but more like a spiritual practice, belonging so deeply to yourself that you gain the courage to stand alone when you have to.
But still seeking that real, genuine connection with others.
We've touched on those key practices for braving the wilderness. Moving in closer to people, even when it's uncomfortable. Speaking truth to bullshit, but doing it with civility and generosity.
Recognizing that dehumanization is a hard line, an absolute boundary, and remembering the importance of courage, vulnerability, trust, that braving acronym applied to ourselves and how we treat others.
So if braving the wilderness means finding connection even when it's uncomfortable, and choosing courage over comfort again and again.
What's maybe one small, concrete step you could take this week? Maybe just moving a tiny bit closer to someone who sees the world differently than you do. And how might taking even that small step, how might it challenge your own sense of where you belong right now?
Lots to think about. Thank you for going on this deep dive with us.
Thanks for listening. Visit our library and subscribe below for more book summaries. This has been a Sprint Reads production.